Hey, what's up everybody? Idao here from the Mimic Method, and in this video I am going to talk about what's probably the most common language learning question, which is how do I learn new vocabulary? Now usually when people ask this question, they have their mind set on some sort of memorization technique, like, oh, do I use spaced repetition or use like memory palace and all that stuff? I don't think about any of that stuff. I want to convince you in this video to stop thinking about vocab in terms of memorizing things and instead in terms of developing conversational habits, which, if you do them, will automatically and organically grow your vocabulary in the real sense in a place where you can actually use it. All right, so I'm going to show you this 5R method that we do with our students in our programs. And before I get into it though, I want to let you know that on May 11th to June 1st, we'll be doing a 3-week coaching clinic. I'll have one-on-one coaching students as well as kind of a group coaching and group classes set up for people to develop their conversational skills. So we'll be going over this 5R method and actually implementing it through practice meetups. So if you're interested in that, we open up the shopping cart on May 5th and close on May 9th. But getting into it, what is this 5R thing? I'll show you here on the slide. Request, repeat, reuse, record, rehearse. Our goal here is to apply these habits every time we have a conversation so that when we leave that conversation, we expand our vocabulary organically while doing all the other things we do in conversation, like connecting with people and having a good time, right? So let's go through each of these one by one. First, we have request. This is just the easiest thing. The first thing you do when you work with us as students is you just learn the phrases, the most we call magic questions, which are, how do I say this? Thumbs up. What does that mean? And then also, how would you say this? So what are the different circumstances where you use that? Imagine I'm in conversation, I'm in the live context and I see something and I'm like, oh, using Spanish, ¿Cómo se dice eso? What is this called? How do I say this, right? And then the person gives me the sounds that are used to represent that object or that idea. And then I mimic that. And I'm like, alfombra, right? Alfombra, sí, alfombra, right? And then I take that sound, and then now, instead of me having received that word in like an iPhone app or on some flashcards where I'm completely removed from a social embodied situation. So it's just a concept, like a kind of a dry fact that's residing in a completely different part of the brain versus when I'm in conversation and I touch the object and I'm like, eso aquí, ¿cómo se dice esta cosa aquí? Silla, right? And I'm like, I'm sitting on that chair, I'm touching that chair. There's an emotional connection to it. There's a human being I'm talking to. This is the soil, the fertile soil in which you want to plant the seeds of vocabulary, right? Not in the kind of arid land of being by yourself on your smartphone, like, chair, silla, brink. It's a completely different experience. You want to be learning vocabulary in the flow of real life conversation is the best place to learn. But most people don't even ask that question. They don't ask, how do I say this? They're just kind of, I don't know that word, and they give up. Or they hear someone say a word, they don't know it, and instead of asking, what does that mean? ¿Qué significa? If it's Spanish. Then they say, well, I guess I don't know that word, right? And then they just let the opportunity fly by. That would have been a perfect time for you to learn a new vocabulary word, but you just let it go, so there was no point to it, right? So the very first thing you need to practice is first just saying those questions, and the second applying them in conversation so you learn, okay? Next, we have repeat. So when we first coach people on this, we say, okay, ask the question, ¿Cómo se dice chair? Silla. And then people are like, yeah, so anyways, as I was saying, blah, 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 right? I'm like, what are you doing? That's the time to repeat. Repeat it multiple times. So you're like, hey, blah, blah, blah. ¿Cómo se dice chair? Silla. Silla. Sí, silla. 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 Silla, 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 silla. Bueno, silla. Right? You need to get a lot of reps in before the word actually takes shape in your mouth. Remember, in conversation, you can't write things down. You have to hear and listen. So repetition is necessary for you to actually get it in your muscle memory, get it in your auditory memory. So repetition, again, simple thing, but this developed after watching countless people in conversation, and I'm kind of analyzing what they're doing right and wrong. And most people just don't ask the question, and if they do, they don't repeat it. And I'm like, what are you doing? Low-hanging fruit, you're just letting it rot on the table, right? So repeat after you've requested it. Then the next thing you want to do is reuse that word. So people will get a word, they'll say silla, 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 and then they'll continue the conversation and then just never use that word again. And of course they'll forget it. But when I'm giving a new word, and by the way, I say word, but it can be an expression, it can be a turn of phrase, doesn't matter. Something that natives do and say that I'm taking, I'm trying to put it into my body and into my mind so I can use it. I will then reuse it and be super redundant about it. So I'm like, yeah, silla. So this is a really good silla. I love it. Such a comfy silla. Hey, do you have any other sillas here in the house? What's your favorite silla? You like sillas? Right? So I'm just like searching for opportunities. And then later in the conversation when it comes up, I'm like, and you know about sillas, this reminds me of sillas, right? So just having that in the back of the mind to be constantly watering that seed that I planted when I requested the new word, watering it with each new use of the word that I can within that same conversation and the conversations to follow as well. The more I do that, the more likely I will actually learn that word. So I requested the word, I repeated the word, and I'm reusing it multiple times within the same conversation. When the conversation is over, I can then record it. Really, the first 3 R's are what matter most. That's your in conversation. If you just optimize those when we work with students, we don't move them on until they're doing that all the time automatically, and it completely changes their whole attitude from being passive learners, like, okay, I don't know that word, to being like more aggressive ones, like, ¿qué? Eso, ¿qué? What's that? What's that? Da, blah, blah, repeat, reuse. And it changes your whole psychology as a learner to be more assertive, to be more aggressive with your learning and being on the front foot attack mode, which is super important at a fundamental level that I won't get into now. But that's why we train it very early on, because it really does affect everything. So after the conversation, if you want to be a diligent learner, which confessingly I am not usually, I don't do this as often as I could, but it does make a difference when you do, which is after a conversation, look back and recall what just happened and then be like, oh yeah, what were the new words that came up there? Chair, silla, and caterpillar, and candlelight, right? And then I will write those words down in English, in your native language, not in your target language. Why? Because when you write it down in your target language, then you are robbing yourself of the future opportunity to get your brain network to fire to recall it. Because the next day I come in and I see the word chair written down there, and what happens is I say chair, and my mind goes through this like neural network cascade where I'm like chair. I flash back to that embodied social emotional conversation, and I feel that chair again, and I'm like, oh, what was chair? And then I'm like, silla, and it comes back. And that whole process of recall is where the magic occurs. People just don't get that. They're like, oh, give me the answer now. But it's like, no, it's the process of searching for the answer that is the learning. Okay, this is not school where you're just trying to get an answer to get a good grade. Super important little detail there. So I always write it down in English so I can train the recall. And if I don't remember it, then I ask somebody, ¿Cómo se dice chair? Silla. All right? But really I'm recording the fact that that word came up for me in conversation and all the other words that came up, and then just kind of, going back and reflecting on that experience. And then after I have those things recorded, I can then rehearse them. So it's something I can do outside of conversation. What I mean by rehearse. Rehearsal's a big part of our program. People study. But as I always say, language is not an academic subject. It's a performance art that is to be performed and practiced. So like an actor doesn't study their lines, they rehearse their lines, which is to say they use their whole body. They imagine themselves to be talking to the other person on stage and being like, ¿Tú tienes una silla? Sí, yo tengo una silla. ¿Dónde está mi silla? Right? And later on, I'll make a video talk about all the different types of role play games we've developed to help you rehearse and so you have material to work with. But the overarching point here is that there's a very big difference between me, again, being by myself, completely out of a social context, and I'm just writing down a bunch of letters in this abstract concept of chair. SILLA, okay, next one. Versus I'm living the experience. I'm sitting in a silla. I'm touching a silla. I'm smelling the silla. I'm talking to someone. I sold the silla to him. He sold it to me. I exchanged money. We laughed. We sat together on the silla. This is how vocabulary is learned. It's lived. It's not memorized. All right. So reviewing then what these 5 R's are: request the word in the context where you feel the need for it. Repeat it multiple times so you can get it in your muscle memory and auditory memory, and then reuse it as often as possible, not being afraid to be redundant and repetitive. Who cares? Just make sure you make it social savvy. And then if you want to be extra diligent, after the conversation, write it down, record it, so that later on you can rehearse it and then come back to it, right? And if you do all these R's to the max and just make it a habit of yours, then you will no longer ask the question, how do I learn vocabulary? You will just have conversations, and vocabulary will naturally grow into this vast garden of lived expressions that flow out of you. You will no longer be stagnant at your vocab level. You will always be growing. So always think, as a major theme of my program, is all about the process, not the product. So you got to think, how can I change my entire way I'm engaging in the process of me speaking and engaging in this language, such that it achieves my goals of me just flowing toward fluency. All right. So 5 R's, try them out. If you want to actually apply these in practice, then stay tuned. We'll be opening up shopping cart on May 5th registration for people to do either one-on-one coaching or join our kind of group learning environment where we apply these techniques. You know, it's one thing to just understand these 5 R's, to actually apply them in the context of a social setting where you're trying to not be awkward, you have other social goals you're trying to meet alongside your learning goals, is a bit of a subtle art form which just needs to be practiced, right? So that's what we'll be doing in this workshop, in this coaching clinic. So more news on that to come. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments, like the video, subscribe, and thank you for watching.